put out. So we were sort of sending people home a little bit ahead of the game, and we managed to double our internet bandwidth in our office and buy a bunch of go-to-my-PC licenses and sort of, get a little bit of a jump on the storm. But like everybody else and like the rest of the state government, we're having to figure out how to function. So there was a couple of weeks where we couldn't process much of our daily work while we were converting to being able to operate paperlessly. The good news is that we can now do pretty much everything that we used to do on paper through DocuSign, and the state controller's office, those are the people that actually write checks,
Right.
switched to DocuSign as well. So we're able to
Wow.
to actually pay our invoices, and we've managed to participate in 3 property closes since we all went home. One of them was the Tunitas beach in San Mateo County, which we toured just before the last board meeting we had. That was an in-person board meeting. So we are keeping our work going, and I was actually in Washington D.C. the second week of March, and flew home on an almost empty 757. But we're keeping our eye on the stimulus packages in D.C. for what it could mean for our work here in California, and we're just trying to keep all of our projects, major and minor, moving ahead. So we're typically, we have 1 or 2 people in the office out of 68 people per day, because we still get mail. So somebody has to physically look at it, and sometimes scan it, and send it on its way. But we've managed to convert to working at home.
Well, Sam, I think it's incredible the way you and your team have kind of pivoted so quickly and adapt to the moment to be able to remotely, frankly, keep the money flowing and keep projects moving forward. Many of us saw your email that you sent out, I believe it was on April 3rd, so really early into this, sharing updates about how you and the Coastal Conservancy staff are adopting your policies and procedures in these times. And you're sharing that you're working from home, you're able to use DocuSign. Can you share some of kind of the biggest highlights or changes that you've made in terms of project staff working with their grantees?
So we are, as a matter of policy, going to bend over backwards to keep all of our grantees working. I mean, obviously, depending on what kind of project you have with us, you may not be able to do it. For instance, our Explore the Coast program, which is about actually bringing, mostly kids to the coast. In many cases, who've never been before, you can't do that right now. But some of the grantees are actually, pivoting to figuring out ways to do, to do things virtually. So, but if you need extensions on your grant agreements, if you need to change, rearrange your budgets, if you need to rearrange your scope of works, anything that we can do to make it possible for you all to continue working, we will do. This is the time of year when we have to worry about funds expiring.
Right.
So we're simultaneously trying to get things into contract if there's a deadline, or extend work agreements, and at the same time we're going to try to get everything reappropriated through the budget process that's going to be probably the most unusual budget process any of us have
Yes,
seen.
it's going to be Mr. Toad's Wild Ride
It's going to be
for
it's
sure.
going to be a wild ride. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Sam, what I'm hearing you say is that you are prioritizing your staff kind of being flexible and adaptive in this moment, but
Yeah.
there's so much unknown. I mean, you mentioned the appropriations process, and we really don't know about the timing or quantity of funding that's going to be rolling out through
Right.
existing programs, right?
Right.
Um, so in that context, I know many people when they registered for the webinar were thinking about future funding opportunities.
Right.
I'm thinking about all of the programs you administer, the Restoration Authority as well. The timing for those RFPs coming out, when you apply, when you receive the funding, is really critical to developing your project.
Right.
In this context of all this uncertainty, and I'm definitely asking you to bust out your crystal ball here,
Right.
would you say that the number one factor for existing grantees or future hopeful grantees is that they contact your staff and talk about the full scope of what they're dealing with, not just their specific project questions?
Yeah. If you're a grantee and you're having problems or you foresee having problems, you should call your project manager
Okay.
immediately and to see if we can work things out for you.
Yeah.
Don't wait. And similarly, don't sit on your invoices. Get your
Right.
invoices in, because it takes a little longer right now for us to process things, particularly for the project managers to do the processing work. So so don't wait and talk to us. Talk to us early. I mean, we have had um, you know we have grantees who are rearranging the project in order to be able to fulfill the terms of their grant agreement in whatever the time is under the current circumstances, and we're whatever we can do legally, uh, we will do to help people out,
Okay.
because we don't
That's
want to make we are injecting money into the economy, which is heading into a recession or is in a recession. We don't want to, aside from the importance of the work, we also don't want to make things worse. And we certainly don't want, any of our nonprofit partners to have financial problems.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We want to keep people working wherever we can. And you mentioned overhead. Annie and I had a really good conversation with Polly Escovedo, who's the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Bonds and Grants for Natural Resources. They, similarly to what you're describing, Sam, are wanting to be really flexible.
Mm-hmm.
They're able and willing to look at grant budgets and revise them as needed to support grantees in this moment. And I'm thinking in particular about our nonprofit partners who often have to match grant awards, capital grant awards, with their own private funding. They use their overhead as a match, and they're paying to keep the lights on and keep staff working, even as they're spending down their grant. And a lot of times those grants don't cover those costs. And I know that there's not, well, let me just ask you, is there flexibility for people to try to cover some of those indirect or other operational costs in a grant that's existing?
So this topic, the topic of what the state pays for overhead,
Yeah.
has been a huge bugaboo for me for years.
Yeah.
So the Coastal Conservancy pays 15% overhead. It will allow up to 15%. So why do we do that? Well, because the Department of Finance has told us if we do anything more than that, they will look askance at that when they do an audit. Is that a
Right.
bright line standard? No.
Okay.
That's just sort of what we've been told. There are state funders who won't pay any overhead, and there's no reason for that. And I've argued up, to Sacramento that we really, first of all, 15% is too low anyway, and certainly now we should be willing to pay more, because it's ridiculous to expect people to, uh, carry out these projects without paying the rent and paying the
Right.
utility bills and paying their people and doing all the things that you can that are very difficult to you know assign out to any particular project that you have funded. And of course, the smaller you are,
Yeah.
the higher your overhead is as a percent, as you know, because Together Bay Area is not a large organization.
Yeah.
Your overhead is higher as a percentage of your total cost, just because you don't have as many, you don't have as many people. So
Right.
we can't go on, we can't go above 15%, but uh, we've argued pretty strongly, up to Sacramento, that we all should be able to. And it's one of the things we can do that would really, help.
Really help right now. Yeah. So I hope everybody on the webinar heard that loud and clear. This is a case-by-case review for Sam and his staff, but if you need help, if you need organizational support in the context of your grant project, please reach out.
Yep.
Any other sort of, high-level messages, kind of the top one or two things that you want to say specifically to your existing and future hopeful grantees, Sam, about this moment and your team?
So we've gotten a lot of questions from people who've been around a while. Is there going to be another bond freeze?
Yeah.
That's from people who remember the unhappy days of 2008 to 2009.
That's right.
And I think the answer is no, for a couple of reasons. One is that the recession that we're in is caused by the large numbers of people who are out of work because of the virus.
Yeah.
The 2008 recession was a financial crisis, and the short-term paper markets froze. And at that time, the state was paying out bond money by, selling short-term paper and then selling the bonds later. And we don't do it anymore that way. We sell bonds as we need the cash. So we have, X number of bonds, not just, resource bonds, but, all kinds of bonds that the state is selling. State's credit rating is excellent. As the governor has pointed out, we came into this recession in better financial condition than any recession we've ever faced, with $20 billion plus rainy day fund and these balanced budgets for years and so on and so forth. So there's no reason to think that existing bonds expenditures are going to be frozen, that we won't somehow be able to continue to spend the bond money that we have. And also remember that part of how the state coped with the recession in 2008 was it borrowed more money.
Right. IOUs were issued, which was
right. But we've paid. That's all been paid off.
Right.
Now the big unknown, because state and federal taxes have been extended, way past April 15. By the time the budget has to be adopted by June 15th, we won't know what the tax receipts are going to be for this tax year. We won't really know that until, let's say, August. So
late summer, yeah.
I think what we're hearing from the legislature is expect a protracted budget cycle, with sort of an initial budget, based on the May revise, but it'll probably have to get changed again here. But there's no reason to think that, current bonds will suddenly, dry up and stop.
That's a really reassuring thing to hear from you, Sam. I know many people have been asking this question, will there be another bond freeze like we saw in 2008? I think what you're highlighting is that, the state has gone through some pretty severe economic downturns before. We had two major ones in one decade. The early aughts saw the removal of Governor Gray Davis with a special election. We've been through this many times, but that this particular economic downturn is really different, not just in the context of the public health crisis that we're facing, but the type of recession that it is and the scale of it, that it's not just our state or our country, but it's having global impacts, and that one of the key priorities in this is keeping as many people working as possible. And those bond dollars, those capital funds, as we talked about earlier, are so critical to keeping jobs moving and keeping projects going forward.
Right, that's right.
Right. Okay, that's helpful to hear. I'm wondering, there are some valuable lessons that we learned in terms of our operational business models, where the flaws were in that, that we learned during the Great Recession of 2008. What do you think, in terms of how all of us sort of responded to that recession, the lessons learned there, what do you think is still helpful today for us to think about, even though this recession is different?
Well, it's a different, yeah, it's very different. I mean, one thing that this recession has exposed, um, is the effect of the amount of inequality that have society. And I've seen it play out even within, uh, the Coastal Conservancy. I mean, not, if you're at the higher end of the state pay scale, then you're likely to have multiple computers, in your
Yeah.
household, and have room to for both working parents to, spread out in the house and work. But that's not true for everybody. That's not
Yeah.
even true for everybody that works for the Coastal Conservancy.
Right.
We're a state agency.
Right.
Um, so the lesson from this recession, I think is going to be the fragility of our social safety net, and the fragility of our overall society, uh, in in the and the fact that so many people are just living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah. I think that's so real, Sam. A lot of discussion is happening around the fact that, these social inequities, the lack of a social safety net, have been problems that many people have been facing. Some of us directly, some of us in our work and trying to address and ameliorate some of those problems, or both. And that this crisis has really laid bare for people who weren't paying attention that these issues are real, and this is a moment where we're seeing those social inequities exacerbated,
Yeah.
and impacting people's health and their jobs. And I know the Coastal Conservancy has done a lot of hard work around formalizing its justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and that, you put out JEDI guidelines. Can you talk a little bit about what you and your staff are thinking about, if in specifically addressing some of the social inequity issues that are being exacerbated by the current moment, whether it's through your grant programs, your JEDI program?
So we are, as you said, we've got these draft JEDI guidelines: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, um, and we're planning to bring them to our board for adoption at our rescheduled meeting.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
had been an April meeting. um, One of the things that's come up for us now is how do you make sure that everybody can sort of equitably participate in the proceedings of a government agency like
Yeah.
ours if we're not going to have an in-person meeting? There's a whole set of issues that you have with in-person meetings. When do you hold them? Where do you hold them? Are they, transit accessible? So on and so forth. Now
Right.
the issues with the, not in-person meetings are, well, do you have a computer at home? Can you watch the webinar? Do you have good enough internet to, to hear the sound? Do you have enough computers at home that your kid can do their schoolwork while you're,
Right.
avidly watching our, our board meeting or anybody else's? And there's a huge amount of experimentation happening now in state and local government around around that. But you know, the need for everybody to stay home has brought this whole new set of issues. Because you remember the governor pretty early on issued 2 executive orders that
Yeah.
made it possible for us to hold public meetings completely, completely virtually. So that's all well and good, but of course that doesn't, in and of itself, mean that everybody who might want to participate in those
Can.
meetings
Yeah.
can participate.
Yeah.
And that's I don't think we have an easy, an easy answer. What I'm seeing is various agencies, including mine, are going to try out different ways of, ways of doing it and see what, and see what works best. And, it could be that this could affect how we do things in the future. I mean, if we find that we can get more participation
Yeah.
with a teleconference meeting than we would with an in-person meeting, then maybe
Then
we'll
why
do
not keep doing that?
why not
Yeah.
keep doing it? Yeah.
Right. Well, I know a lot is being asked of you and your staff to sort of innovate around these systems on
Yeah.
the fly, under duress, with a number of other issues going on. But I also think about, the fact that our sort of trajectory for this until we have a vaccine in place is a question mark. And so I think it's, it's wise for all of us to be looking at the changes we're making now as, maybe being something we need to consider adopting on a longer term.
Yeah. I mean, I've been pretty clear with my staff that, I don't have a magic crystal ball, but we could easily all still be working at home in June.
Right.
We could, be gradually released back to normal life. The virus
Right.
could flare up again. We could get, until there's a vaccine, we're not through it. And even even once there's a vaccine, basically everybody, the whole world, has to get vaccinated, and that is in and of itself a challenge, and that will take,
That'll take
that'll
time.
take some amount of time. It'll take some amount of time.
So Sam, as we are all kind of looking in the near term, what's our most urgent pressing priority, but then also kind of asking these longer term questions, can you give us a little peek into Sacramento? The resources agency, the legislature, we can imagine that everybody is looking at sort of addressing the issues most close to the pandemic crisis in this moment. For resources, they have a staff of 20,000 people. So there's obviously, HR and personnel issues that they're working on there. But what are you starting to see in terms of conversations happening in Sacramento, specifically around our business model, the work that we care about, the types of projects that we care about, addressing climate change, addressing social inequities through programs and projects, those types of, what are you hearing? Are you hearing the conversation evolve away from like crisis management a little bit or not?
It's starting to move away from the, oh my God, what do we do today to cope with, this, that, or the other. There's an interesting parallel, and I'm not the first person that this has occurred to, between this and climate change, because this pandemic, it wasn't just predictable, it was predicted. For the last 20 or 30 years, scientists have been telling us that this would happen and that we should prepare. And the the Obama the Obama administration and the Bush administration before it actually started preparing for this, and then the current crop of fools that we have dismantled all of that. And this was something that there's no good reason why we don't have a national stockpile with 250,000 ventilators in it and 1,095,000,000 masks. We had the time and the money to do all of those things, and instead, lots of states actually cut. We've been cutting their public health budgets, and counties too. And And California apparently had a stockpile of emergency gear, the funding for which was cut, by the previous administration.
Right.
So the parallels with climate change are obvious. The scientists are telling us that it's coming, and they're telling us that it's going to be bad, and here's what it's going to look like, and here's what we need, and here's what we need to do. I like to hope that we will start to pay, as a society, start to pay more attention to that. I'm not completely convinced that that's the case. We
Yeah.
have a propensity for doing, foolish things
Yeah.
as a species.
Indeed.
There is a group within the Resources Agency, and this might be true in other cabinet agencies, that's starting to think about the future of work in the in our part of the government. What kinds
Yeah.
of things can we usefully change? I mean, I'm I'm convinced that now that we've gone paperless, I don't want to go back.
Right.
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 But to not go back means we have to make sure that the state controller doesn't want to go back,
That's right.
because there's no point in us being paperless if
Yeah. If they're cutting paper checks still. Yeah.
yeah, right. So so that and that could be a challenge, because whenever this is over, whatever over
Right.
means, people are going to want to go back to normal as fast as they can. The only historic parallel to what we're experiencing now was the 1918 flu pandemic.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's interesting about that pandemic is that when it ended, there was very little reflection on it. No one wrote novels about life in the flu epidemic. There was a literature came out around World War I, but it's almost like there's this historic amnesia that happened because it was so awful that people wanted to forget it.
Just put it in the dustbin. Yep.
As soon as they could. And hopefully we won't do that, because there are these important lessons, to be learned, not least of which is how we cope with climate change, which, I mean, the great thing about sheltering in place is that the air quality's never been better.
Right. Much less.
But eventually the cars and the planes will all, get cranked up again, and
Yeah.
smog will come back, and we'll be back on our way.
Yeah. I'm hearing something really important in what you're saying, Sam, which is that, and it kind of tracks back to what your comment earlier about this virus exposing all of the vast social inequities and lack of social safety net in our country. There's an opportunity here, as grim as this moment is, for us to think about how we bounce forward instead of bouncing back. Right? We can't just we don't want to get back to normal, but maybe there's some opportunity here for us to be transformational in how we meet this moment. I'm thinking about the work that our members are doing in tracking the climate resilience bond, and what we're hearing coming out of Sacramento about that bond pivoting to more of an economic stimulus framework. We're really watching that space like hawks. And we want to see the state put forward some capital investment that will keep people working, create new jobs, would complement future federal stimulus packages, and also continue to accelerate our work to address climate change. Because as you say, the science shows us that a change in climate is really relevant to this type of crisis that we're living through right now. What's your over-under on the climate resilience bond being turned into an economic stimulus package and moving forward?
So I'm hearing the same thing, that the administration is interested in, or might be interested in, a recovery bond as opposed to a resilience bond. Of course, the two things are not incompatible, because a lot of the things that we want to do to prepare for climate change involve jobs. I mean, the Coastal Conservancy, along with some of our partners, is actually involved in building two very large levees here in the Bay
Mhm.
Area.
Right.
Right now, they're part of restoration projects, but they are, they're levees being built to accommodate um, future flood control, and there are quite a few jobs, involved in both of them. Um, a recession, in a weird way, it's a great time to have a bond because interest rates are low. And for people that do land acquisition, real estate prices are low. Um, and like a lot of agencies, we had been seeing bids for construction jobs come in very high compared to the engineering estimates. And, now that it sounds almost ghoulish, but now that the economy has crashed or is crashing, that should change. So from that
Mhm.
perspective, a bond could do a lot of good, both preparing the state, um, long term for climate change, as well as in the short term, actually getting people employed. And
Right.
interest rates are, I think, have dropped back down to where they were in you know in 2009.
Right.
On the other hand, the financial uncertainty that state and local governments face, and don't forget, there's a lot of what state government does is actually transfer money to local governments,
Yeah.
uh, and local governments, some forms of tax revenue, like for instance the parcel tax that pays for the restoration authority, um, that should be reasonably secure,
Stable. Right.
stable. $12 a year per parcel. But if you're a small coastal city that relies on tourism, or even a big coastal city that, like Anaheim, that has Disneyland in it, um, you just lost all of your transient occupancy tax,
Right.
right? Which for some places is a very big percentage of their budget. So
Yeah.
what
And fare
looks
box
like,
revenue.
and we've seen our transit systems have lost their fare box revenue, and so and it won't be very, what seems like is going to happen in Sacramento, excuse me, uh, is there'll be a very compressed budget process sort of kicked off with the May revise,
Yeah.
and then they'll have to revise the budget again sometime in August based on what the tax revenues
Revenue. Mm-hmm.
actually are. And somewhere in there, the legislature and the administration will have to figure out what their appetite for a bond is versus sort of the potential, you know, the potential risks. I mean, the other thing that no one really knows is, well, how long is this recession
Right.
going to last? And again, we're in, nothing like this has happened for 102 years, so it's
It's uncharted
it's
territory.
uncharted territory. But
Right.
I think the message to your membership is, you're going to have to be on your toes, because when the legislature comes back, things are going to move very fast, with even more than the usual amount of chaos,
Right. More than usual.
with a more
So,
than normal amount of chaos.
right, right. Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about those cool dance moves that we need to be making right now as stakeholders and advocates. Um, we know that if there is appetite for a climate focused bond or a green stimulus bond package, um, that we're going to need to be making the case for the types of projects and jobs that we would want to see funded through that. That would be a capital
Right.
investment that the state would
Mhm.
provide,
Right.
right? So project implementation, direct project management, contractors, that's the workforce, right, that would be benefiting from that.
Right.
So obviously, in your mind, like what's some of the key data or some of the key messages that we need to be gathering and talking about to make the case for that type of investment?
So you all should be doing what we've already started doing within the state, because of course I mentioned we're keeping an eye on the federal government, which has,
Right.
I, they've done one stimulus or two, I've lost track, two, and there's probably a third on the way.
Yeah.
So we've already taken a look at what are the projects in our portfolio that are somewhere relatively close to being ready to actually start physical work.
Right.
What do we think they're going to cost? Um, how much employment do we think is going to be generated? Package those all together, send them up to Sacramento where they get packaged together with everybody else's
Yep.
projects. So all of your members should be doing that. You should be asking yourself, what do I have? You know, that is restoration of some sort. Including forestry, fire
Yeah.
prevention activities, things of that kind, trail building,
Mm-hmm.
like anything that employs people. Um, make a list. What do you think it's going to cost? Where are you in the process? You
Yep.
know, um, and that we're to the extent that we have funding, we're going to be happy to you know pay for planning and permitting to move projects closer to being, shovel ready, a term that I hate because it's kind of meaningless. I mean, it's never what they're never really as shovel ready as as you think they are, as you claim they are. But
I think we could do a whole webinar on
on
shovel
shovel ready, yeah,
readiness.
I think we
Absolutely. Maybe we should. Yeah.
so really all of you are members that have the ability to um, hire people to move dirt or build trails or do anything like that should be, putting your lists together now and, using models that are available to estimate the job impacts
Okay.
to those projects. Because
Okay.
you never know when you'll get the call. Hey, what do you got? We need it, 5 o'clock
Right.
today.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Sam. Together Bay Area's Policy Committee is working on a survey of our members right now. I'm hoping that this will go out early this week so we can start collecting data on the current jobs that we contribute to the job market, as well as future jobs looking into 2021 in the context of a climate resilience bond. I'm also thinking, Sam, about the non-capital costs that it takes to move these projects forward. So admin staff, we talked earlier about overhead and indirect costs, planning funding, things like that. And it's going to require, I think, a lot of creativity. But is there a way for the state to support, that leverage that we need from, private investment to advance these projects? What can we do as stakeholders too? I mean, what's the silver bullet, if you will, for getting that full picture of funding for a full project life cycle in this context?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very interesting question. The Coastal Conservancy, of course, historically has been happy to fund the planning and permitting that we all know is necessary to actually get to the project implementation. But a lot of funders, both public and private, you know, don't want to do that because they don't, they feel like they don't get as much credit
Right.
for it, or they somehow feel like it's not, um, it's not a capital expense the way actually, building a thing is. But it's pretty well established in state law and policy that since you have to get permits and you have to have, engineering design and drawings, and you have to go through
Yeah.
CEQA, that those are all parts of a capital project, and there is no reason why other state agencies shouldn't pay for those things, and there's also no reason why private
Yeah.
foundation funders shouldn't pay for those things, and some of
Right.
them do.
Right. So yeah, I think part of the conversation that stakeholders need to be having is talking to existing private donors and foundations about our plans, our hopes, or a vision for economic green stimulus and what private capital investment would do to leverage, ideally, hopefully what we're seeing the state put together, as we move towards November. There's so many questions, Sam, about the viability
Yeah.
of a bond beyond what you just described, which has been really helpful. I mean, we're thinking about the legislative deadlines that need to be met, the
Right.
constitutional deadlines in order to get something onto a November ballot. Tons of questions there, and I'm not going to be cruel and ask you to explain all of those, but I would, just in your years of having gone through numerous initiatives going on to the ballot, do you have a sense, I mean, what's your sort of gut level sense about voters being willing to pass something like this in November? And I know that that is definitely a crystal ball question, but
Yeah,
what do you think?
it's very hard to answer. It's the kind of thing that, you know, people need to do some polling on. And
Yeah.
of course, if you poll on it now, it doesn't
What,
mean very much for what you'd be
6 months from now?
6 months
Yeah.
from now, right? Um, I was struck, of course, by how uh, popular our parks and open spaces and beaches were and are
Yeah.
as soon as the shelter in place order came down. So there's no question that um, our citizens appreciate what we do
Right.
and value it so much that we had to close it all over the state because there were too many people,
Yeah.
crowding in. Um, so that's a positive data point.
Really good
Uh,
point.
I, I've been keeping my eye on the chat box where my old buddy Fred Keeley has been commenting, and
Yes. Thank you.
the
Our former pro tem.
the uh, uh, the biggest problem the legislature will face will be the sheer uncertainty
Yeah.
going through the budgeting process, um, and the Department of Finance will likely and typically and appropriately take a conservative view
Yeah.
because that's their job.
It's what they should do. Right.
That's what they do. Um, so I think I think the sheer uncertainty is going to be uh, uh, sort of one of the biggest obstacles to any kind of bond,
Yeah.
whether it's regardless of how green, right? It might be.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So, I mean, I'm hearing some clear direction. Let's get our data gathered. Let's understand what our ideal timeline and costs and project goals are for the next year, agnostic of the issues of the moment, so that, as Mr. Keeley just said in the chat, we don't want to be caught flat-footed if our state leaders decide that they do want to move forward on this.
Right, and also remember that work on a bond now is never wasted.
Right.
You might not get what you want in this bond, and there might not be a bond, but 2 years from now, hopefully things will be quite different. And historically, when the legislature starts thinking about another bond, they'll look at they'll start with previous versions. So your work is never.
That's right.
Never a waste of time.
Energy well spent, right? No matter what happens,
Always.
we know we're seeing in this moment that it is critical for us to keep moving forward to address climate change. And so it's all grist for the mill. So Sam, in the few moments that we have left, we've got about 12 or 13 minutes left. I want to open up the chat for folks. Just a reminder to our lovely participants on the webinar, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button, and you can ask questions there of Sam and me. I'll get them and I can read them to Sam. The chat function is not a good place to put questions. There's a lot going on in there. So if you can please use the Q&A. And I've got a couple questions in here already. One is about going back to this question of shovel ready. What's the time frame in terms of what the legislature and the administration are thinking in the context of a bond? Sam, what does shovel ready mean between now and?
So shovel ready is one of these terms like sustainability and resiliency that it means very little in and of itself. But I think that for us, we would ask the question, well, if you got the money today, could you have a contractor under contract in 6 or 8 months?
Okay. Okay. So folks, there's a window to start organizing around.
Typically, and typically that means you've got most of your permits and you've gotten through CEQA. However, you have to, whether it's full-on EIR/EIS or neg deck or mitigated neg, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thanks, Sam. Lots of good questions coming into the Q&A. Thanks, everybody. This is a specific one about one of your really great programs, Sam, Explore the Coast grant applications. If folks are thinking about proposing work, programming work in the outdoors starting in the fall, is that reasonable? Should folks be planning their projects agnostic to sort of that, again, crystal ball question is like, when are we going to be able to go outside together? We don't know. And would you suggest that grantees should just propose their projects on the timeline that makes sense to them, sort of irrespective of that guessing game of when we can actually go outside and stand next to people?
And when school will be back.
And when school will be back open.
A lot of the programs are actually tied to the school year. Yeah,
right.
I don't think that we have much, I don't think that we or you have much choice but to, assume that this will end and
yeah,
we will all be able to be outside, together again.
Yeah.
In some fashion. We extended the deadline for the current round of Explore the Coast grants just because we figured people are, scrambling just to figure out
life.
Yeah, life, kids at home,
right.
all of that. But yeah, I think, I think you should assume that you'll be able to run your program in some fashion.
Okay.
Outdoors.
All right, thank you, Sam. Yeah, I hear that, grantees. Just assume the best as you put together your timelines. And as Sam said at the beginning of the call, project staff are working really hard to be flexible and revise project timelines and budgets as needed.
Yeah.
Here's a really beautiful question, actually. This is Shannon O'Brien. I'm not sure what organization she's with, but she's curious about what projects the Coastal Conservancy has coming up, types of projects, geographies, and how consultants and the community can support you all, you being the Coastal Conservancy. What can we do to help?
We have, my grosbeak has returned. Very lovely bird. Quite
That's
noisy.
awesome.
Quite noisy though. You can probably hear it over my microphone.
No, it's okay.
We intend to continue operating our Climate Ready program. I think the crisis has shown us that the need to prepare for the things that we know are going to happen in the future has never been greater. We've been participating in Secretary Crowfoot's Cutting Green Tape initiative, and we are hopeful that will pay dividends. And we have our own sort of version of that going in the Bay Area for wetland projects. The Bay Regulatory, Innovation Team, Bay Restoration Regulatory Innovation Team. So that's that is certainly going to continue. The work of the Restoration Authority is going to continue. In fact, the authority is going to have a meeting a few days after the Coastal Conservancy in May and come out with the next tranche of projects there. I mentioned that recessions are good times to be acquiring land if you have the money to do so. So we're hopeful that we will continue to be able to to do that. And so we've seen that the demand for outdoor recreation is even larger than we imagined, even larger than
Yeah.
we thought. So continuing to move forward, for instance, on sort of some of the major, trail initiatives, the Coastal Trail, the Bay Trail, the Bay Ridge Trail, the Santa Ana River Trail, all things that we're deeply involved in, and want to continue moving ahead on.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. You mentioned cutting green tape. I want to just share really briefly with folks. This is an initiative being undertaken by Secretary Crowfoot in partnership with the California Landscape Stewardship Network. A number of state regulatory agency leaders and staff, as well as stakeholders and advocates, have been coming together prior to the pandemic crisis in person through a series of roundtable meetings, looking at where there are opportunities to accelerate the pace, scale, and improve the quality of beneficial environmental restoration across the state. We, the project proponents, including myself, Kellex Nelson, Sharon Farrell, a variety of organizations are helping to move this initiative forward. And we are really wanting to make the case that now more than ever, removing the barriers to permitting for environmental restoration projects is really critical, both in terms of getting people back to work, but also addressing the underlying climate impacts that we're seeing that have gotten us, frankly, to this moment. So I'm hearing that continuing that momentum on cutting green tape and ensuring that projects get permitted quickly is a really important part of what we're trying to work on right now. Sam, I just want to share with you, there are several thank yous to you and your staff for extending grant deadlines and being flexible in this moment. I know people are really appreciative. There are also a lot of questions about upcoming deadlines, and I know that this is some of a question mark. You can't really keep to your same schedule of grant cycles, I'm guessing. What should people do? What's the best way for people to track grant deadlines that are coming up?
For us, everything will get posted on our website. So just
Okay.
check our website.
Okay. Check
You
the
know,
site, folks.
Yeah, the May, so the April board meeting got moved to May, but we're hopefully not going to have to change any other of our scheduled board meetings going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And we've extended some grant deadlines. Now I don't anticipate extending, any more. Although, if because of the crisis you're going to have problems meeting a deadline, talk to us
Okay.
as soon as possible, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, thanks, Sam. I mean, I think inherent in everything that we're hearing from you today is that relationships are what's going to get us through. So if you're struggling, if you have a question about a deadline, if you are concerned about the shovel readiness of your project, on the other end of the phone is a Coastal Conservancy staff member who's going through probably similar things that you are. They're working from home with family underfoot.
Yep.
Maybe their Wi-Fi isn't awesome. I don't know. But
Yep.
So with sensitivity to that, reach out and ask your questions. Check the website for updates and reach out to your Coastal Conservancy project manager for questions. All right, Sam, we've just got 3 minutes left. I'd love to hear, how would you close this out? What's giving you hope? What are you doing to ensure your own personal resilience and the resilience of your staff in this moment?
What I'm doing personally is making sure that I get outside and get some exercise, because that's just really important for my sanity and my overall health. I've been incredibly heartened by the response of our state government to the pandemic, local government. I mean, I can't tell you how proud I am to live in the first urban area to shelter in place.
Yeah, same.
In the country.
Yeah.
And I brag about it to my East Coast relatives, who are, many of whom are living in New York, and it's the response of our government and the willingness to listen to what the scientists and the medical experts say, and do what needs to be done unflinchingly.
Yeah,
it has been terrific. And the the ability of my staff to pivot to working at home has
I know.
just been magnificent.
It's incredible. We're so grateful.
I am so proud of them. So all of that, all of that gives me hope. You know, this is an unprecedented crisis, and we know that out of crisis typically comes change. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to be thinking about how do we make that change for the better? How do we make that change for the good? In our cities, in our state, and in our country. Understanding, of course, that there will be an election in November that was going to be quite important to that change process. So that I'm hopeful that if we all keep our eye on the ball here, that we can make some good things come out of this.
Thank you so much, Sam. I love that message. And I leave all of you with those words of wisdom from Sam. Let's work hard. Let's paint the picture of what we're doing and how we're doing it and what we need to keep going, and keep our eye on the prize for November. Thank you again, Sam, for being with us. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Take care of yourselves. Stay healthy. Stay 6 feet apart. And we'll look forward to talking to you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Sam.